Waiting for that. All right. Over to you, Graham.
Hello and welcome to today's Biotensegrity Tea Party. My name is Graham Scarr from Robin Hood Country in Nottingham, and my co-host, Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Lowell de Solorzano. I'm originally from Brockton, Massachusetts, but now living for these last 40 years or so in Washington, D.C.
And Chris Clancy.
Hi, I'm Chris Morita Clancy, and I was born in Vancouver, BC.
The big flats of eggs, the 30.
Not sure what's going on here. Okay, thank you. And I'm coming to you now from Deep Cove, the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation. Happy to be here.
Graham, I accidentally muted you. I was trying to mute someone else. Can you guys unmute? Sorry.
Great. And today's Biotensegrity Party is episodes 9 and 10 of Leonid Blyum's interview with Stephen Levin on Everything I Know. Episode 9, Goodbye Engineering, Hello Structural Emergence, and episode 10, Geometry and Where It Gets Us. And they're both a bit shorter than we usually have, so that's why we put them both together. So we're going to start with, as usual, a toast. So if you raise your glasses or whatever with your favorite tipple, and I think Chris is going to give us a toast to start off with. What is a tipple?
Sure. Thank you, Graham.
Explain.
Okay. You see, not only Robin Hood, but also some British expressions, right? So
Exactly.
So let's raise our glasses first to Steve and Leonid and Graham and Susan for all of the good work you're doing here for the Biotensegrity Archive and our Biotensegrity community, and to every single one of you that's present both now and watching on YouTube, because this community is so important. We couldn't do it without you. And we're so happy to have you here to be really invested in learning well and sharing this paradigm with others. So with that, cheers. Welcome all.
Cheers. Gene.
Right.
And then before we start, I also want to just remind people watching live or watching on YouTube or watching in the future, we love it if you subscribe to the Biotensegrity Archive YouTube channel. We love it if you like every single one of our videos. And we love it if you subscribe to the Biotensegrity Archive email list, biotensegrityarchive.org. And we also love it when you make donations. We've had some recently, and I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. We have an anonymous donor who is matching donations up to $2,500 through the end of 2023. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And if you'd like to turn your videos off during the presentation, then switch them back on for the Q&A at the end. That'd be great.
Great.
Okay.
Oops, wait a minute. I did that wrong.
That's okay. Well, Susan is setting up the recording for us to watch. If all of you on Zoom go up to the top of your screen, there's a little down arrow beside YouTube. If you could click on that and hop over to YouTube and give us a thumbs up or a comment, that would be amazing. Okay, thanks all. Looks like you're ready to start, Susan.
Yep, here we go.
okay, dear friends, we are continuing our Everything I Know series with Dr. Stephen Levin. And in the previous episode, we made an important transition towards the system science. It sounds a bit kind of overwhelming, but I think that the electrical grid example and the fact that everything has to be treated consistently throughout the entire system as it emerges is a very important thing, as opposed to just kind of using the comfortable applications. Here we do the tensional, here we do the compressional, here we do this scale, here we do this scale. So that's a really, really important thing, which is particularly essential in the holistic world and in the holistic message that a lot of people are genuinely subscribing to, but often enough not really fully living the consequences of this. So, and that's why this system approach, as inherently built into the multi-scale transitions within the tensional integrity model, is really essential. So now we will take the next step and try to sort of see how that step in the evolution of the tensegrity understanding led to the further implications and the connections with the rest of the world and so on. So we are now in the 80s.
In the 80s. And we're working hard. At this point, I really, when I got into a deeper understanding of the mechanics, because I was working in it as much as I can, and there's a book behind you called Structure and Nature as a Strategy, Structure and Why Things Don't Fall Down. And that gets...
J.E. Gordon.
Yeah, Gordon was a engineer who built the Spitfire airplane that saved Great Britain.
Oh, wow. So he had some pedigree.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, he throws in a lot of biologic things into this book and really gets you to understand that the biology and the engineering can work together if you understand it in a slightly different way.
Okay.
So he does.
So here we are in the 80s. See,
Yeah.
he was born in 1913. So first paperback printing 1981, third paperback printing 1984. That's the book. Here.
Right.
Okay. So what that sounds is a very promising thing. How that you have to make a tweak. That's a good.
Yeah.
That's a good indication.
But it gave me a deeper insight into the engineering and the engineering problems, because he talks about the engineering problems of stress and strain and shear and crack generation and all that type of things in there, but also then talks about how biologic systems don't follow those rules, don't follow the rules of normal other material engineering that he talks about. And so he talks very distinctly about the differences between material engineering, where you're building buildings, and biologic engineering, where you're building bodies. And you can pick that up very, very well in that book.
Mm.
But he also then, you can then get into a lot of he gets into a lot of biologic things there that sort of melds them together very nicely. At least it did for me.
Okay, I think that's an important thing that we have to highlight here, because what I really want to highlight, especially for our audiences in in the broad spectrum of words, is that when we are in our own domain, in our own field, relatively compartmentalized, right? So you see, there are different schools of thought, there are different ideas and so on, and people have a tendency to sort of stick within them. But when we think about something which is an external field, that external field sounds very homogeneous to us, like, oh, engineering, as if all the engineers speak about the same thing and they are on the same page and they understand each other like this. So, and because I've been asked this question a number of times, like, well, if biotensegrity is sort of so obvious and so powerful and so on, how come that they're not like all of the engineers just subscribe to this idea just like that?
Right.
So I think that's a very good point here.
Yeah, and it's interesting that if I talk to an engineer who's not involved in biomechanics, they have easy acceptance of this, because there's nothing to keep them from doing so. If I talk to them about how to build a system in a biologic framework rather than a mechanical framework. They don't-
Like, by mechanical framework, you mean the man-made things,
right, the man-made things.
Hmm.
They don't have any problem understanding it.
which are assembled out of the spare parts
Right.
and then put together.
Right, right. And the other part of that kind of assembling out of spare parts is that when you think in system science, you're sort of building a house of cards. Any stage in that development, if it goes wrong, the whole thing collapses. So that means that every stage in the evolutionary, in embryologic development process has to fit into the system immediately. It has to be part of the system as it happens.
So I think that that's another important point to highlight, because at least the way how the indicational structure is made and a lot of conceptual build is that it's sort of embryology is something that happened before and doesn't have the, like there are two ways of looking at it. It's like it happened, it passed, that's one way. And the other very popular way is looking at the embryology as preparation and sort of pre-build. It's okay, it's in utero, it doesn't have all this, moment arms and so on and so on, but, who cares, because that's been then. And now we start from this part, we take the vertical, bipedal person who is standing, and then we do all kind of the engineering around it. So, and what you're talking about here is a very important thing. Actually highlights that the system has to carry consistently the properties at every step of its development as it unfolds in time.
Right. Every step. You can't break that pattern.
So it's not just the preparation, it's like, okay, here it was like that, and then suddenly it changes. So it's
Right. So the mechanics in utero have to be related to the mechanics of the person walking on 2 feet.
that's really a statement which is worth repeating, right? So the
Right.
mechanics in utero without any movement as such, right? And even at the stage at the pre-formation of the limbs and so on, mechanics in utero have to be consistent with the mechanics of the fully grown up walking.
Right. It has to be that. I mean, you have to realize that you have something that grows in a confined space, and it doesn't make any difference if you're growing bacteria or you're growing human beings. You're in a confined space. You're in water, or you're in utero where the forces are pushing you from all sides and squeezing you. You're then squeezed out through this narrow canal and burst out to the system, and immediately go from being pressed in from all sides by muscular forces and water and deep dense tissue into air.
And
It's
from
still
a,
function.
that's it, from an environment which is like very uniform,
Uniform.
and ISO, like everything is ISO. ISO.
Right. So at that point, at that instant in time, instead of expanding out and exploding, you reach a particular size and you're functioning in a different milieu completely and able to do that. So you have to figure out how to do that embryologically. You can't, it's not like building a building, that is oriented in this space, but you can't put it in water. You can build a tower on the earth, but if that doesn't work well in the water or in the sky. You've got to have something that's going to be able to go from one stage to the other very quickly and completely and functionally.
So in that sense, it's essential that whenever we have, let's say the argument about trying to get an interpretation to a bipedal vertical standing position, and sort of employ the competing maths and competing models for this. So the essential thing is just to run an additional test. Is there a continuity and time unfolding into the system? Am I correct?
Correct.
Very good. So so that understanding came to you early enough, or it was very much influenced by the system science, or
It was certainly, but the system science really brought it home. But some of it was very early on, because as I said, my first paper, even before my system science, was understanding that it arose from a particular structure relationship right up the scale. But as I said, in the 80s, I really sucked in more information about it and became more confident about it.
So and that's where the books like this, you know, structures and or why things don't fall down or whatever don't fall
Right.
apart. So that has been a very important thing, because also the word structure, right? So I think that's also what we have to highlight. So just to clarify it, right? So that the word structure used in different sense in different branches of human usage, right? So you see, we in the kind of health and medical and whatever field, so the bio field, we have a tendency to be much more loose with that language, and sort of structure and material, they kind of come to, you know, they are almost, you know, then they don't feel that different. Whilst when the engineering, structure is really is a combination, it's a particular set and a particular integration between material and the architecture.
Yes.
So, and that is a very important thing. When we talk about structural principle, we are not saying that this is a particular like embodiment of this particular cables, or this is a particular embodiment of this particular struts and so on.
Right.
We're talking about the relationship of the tension members and compression
Right.
members.
So it's a mix of the material and its architecture.
So that's the important thing to highlight, because, you know, even if we look at this, so by the way, we found, right, so that the first external journey, so the bigger program, and we had a smaller one in the previous one, so this is a larger one, the proceedings of the 34th Annual Conference on Engineering and Medicine and Biology. So this Houston 1981, and here we have the thing from Steve, and where is that? SM Levin P6.6, which sounds the icosahedron as a biologic support system. So, and again, even we talk about this, right? So you see, thinking of the this title itself. So the icosahedron as a biologic support system means more the structural principle,
Right.
rather than, you know, just a particular geometric object.
As you notice, the title doesn't include tensegrity in it at all.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the structural principle based on a geometric shape.
But I think that this is really, like if we read it here, so the summary in that way, present concepts of engineering as applied to biologic structures are based on a cubic system. These structures are conceived as columnar loaded. Actually, that's an interesting columnar. So it's a bit of an old English there, right? So with lever torque angular relationships and moment joints. Tensional forces merely act as the glue to hold the structure together. So effectively, that's an important highlight, right? So that because everybody would agree that yes, the system has both compression and tension into it, and they coexist. But the central point is that where is the horse and where is the cart, right? So where is the leading logic and the morphology there, and where is that supporting? So I think I like this simple image that the tensional forces merely act as the glue to hold the structure together, and that's what we find in the anatomical books.
Right.
A skeleton first,
Yes.
you study the skeleton, and then you start adding muscles on top of it with the idea that the skeleton has to be vertically aligned, bone to bone continuity, and then eventually the muscles are just used as
binders.
just kind of to stitch it together and make it movable. So that's really essential. So effectively here you were highlighting more the ideas of the close packing, triangulation, and the natural creation of forms and structures according to the requirements of minimal energy. So that's, I think, is again a very important thing. So you didn't start with look at the tensegrity model, not even let's start with the icosahedron.
Right.
What I read here, triangulation and natural creation of forms and structures according to the requirements of minimal energy, right? And then what else? And yes, close packing. Yes. So these three properties, so in fact we're talking about these three properties first, and then icosahedron is just as an embodiment
Exactly.
which tends to satisfy these requirements better than the cubic system.
Yes.
So that's really the thing, because I think that especially as the time progresses, very often the things kind of get flipped on its head and say, hey, you guys, you are, why icosahedron? Like what are you, like why you are so particular about this? So that is in effect, we can even call it just, it's just convenient embodiment. But the stronger principle there is this: the close packing process, the minimal energy process, and the evolution of forms process. So it's a process thinking and the systems thinking in first place. And and then it's a kind of a search for the better
That gets you
embodiment.
to the first principles of developing any structure.
So I think that, and that's where we have the very clear manifestation of that, because I think that it's very important that.
And that's in my first paper.
Yeah, 1981. Yes, yeah.
So it's not something new. It's just an expansion of that very basic set of
So
principles.
it's almost next year we're going to celebrate 40 years of your first. That's since first kind of went into
Right.
out there into a broader world, right?
Yes,
So you see,
yeah.
we'll probably need to prepare some special series for that. So but this is, I think, is a very important that we send this message, and that we really highlight how important is this approach, right? Approach to looking at the energy efficient and the close packing process.
Right, because people now think when we talk about tensegrity, it's just a structure that plugs in there that we're using, and it's not. It evolves from these basic development of any structure if in nature by the forces themselves creating it.
Absolutely.
So this structure is an embodiment of those forces.
Of those principles. in
Those
fact.
principles.
Those
Right.
principles, those processes, I would
Those-
say.
right, those
Those processes. And again, I would emphasize this over and over, because otherwise we get this thing, or I don't see icosahedrons in the body.
Right.
Or I don't see the cables and struts, or if you're telling me that the cables and struts are muscles and bones, well, it doesn't fit into your model. They don't kind of overlap this way. So this kind of reasoning is that this relatively simplistic reasoning is what we are always facing there, and always dealing with. So that's why really getting back to the processes is a very essential step.
So we have to accept that that's what any biologic tissue is going to be made of. And what we're trying to
These
do
are the
is understand-
processes that it will.
Right. Those processes, those processes have to be why any biologic system is constructed. Have to follow
Constructed meaning
evolve.
Yeah, because the
Yes.
term constructed
Doesn't
kind
mean from an outside force. No, this is evolve. It's a self-evolution. They have to build themselves from these forces that are being applied.
Okay, so that's a very important thing, and I think that we kind of at least managed to plant this idea firmly, and rooting it all the way back to the origins, and clearly stating that what we with Biotensegrity, this is a discussion that we actually want to have, the discussion that brings us back to the first principles and processes, rather than kind of this bickering about is it the right kind of cable, or is it the right kind of strut? Is it a straight strut, or is it a bent strut, or is it a kind of extensible wire or not extensible wire, and this kind of thing? So I think that's really essential.
right. And we're going to go right into episode 10. So here we go.
Dear friends, we're continuing our episode on the transition to the tensional integrity models. In the previous section, or in the previous sort of sub episode, I've really made the point that we made the point of highlighting that icosahedron is being seen as the embodiment of the three main processes: the close packing, the minimal energy requirement, and the triangulation. So that is our kind of prerequisite mindset before we move to the illustrations.
Right.
Because on the one hand, we keep in mind those processes and looking for the embodiment which is going to be the most sort of appropriate and is going to meet all of them at the same time. That leads us to this particular embodiment. But on the other hand, by studying the embodiment, we get some new insights into the processes or into the other angles that that this particular experience can lead us, right? So I'm handing this primary model to you, and let's.
Well, I'm going to backtrack a little bit for you.
Okay.
All right. We have. So we talked about the icosahedron, and this is a solid icosahedron for you, which has got 12 vertices, 20 sides, 30 edges, all right? Just to let you know. But this is, as far as we can tell, is where all those forces lead, and you end up with this structure. And it has to do with things pushing from the sides, surrounded by other things, and squeezing in on this, and this pushing out to try and keep from being crushed. And when you put 12 around this central 12, this is a shape that emerges from it. But that's as a solid. And let me go back to the tetrahedron. Now the tetrahedron, made of 4 triangles, is the least shape you can get, structure. If we're talking structure, it doesn't make any difference out of material. It's the least structure. So you remove any one
The minimal architectural principle, let's put it like this.
minimal architectural principle. So it's stable, independent, it can have flexible hinges, and it's stable in all directions. But really things are going on, because if you stand it like this and push from the top, what you are having is compression along these lines here and tension on these lines.
So let me just illustrate it.
Right.
So I'm holding
So
the
it would
hand.
be, if you push here, you have compression here. and
Downwards, yes.
Downwards, and tension along here, and that,
On the opposite facets.
right. So these could be replaced by wires, say. But if you turn it at any point, then you've changed the whole structure, because now these are in the what were wires made, and now be under compression they would collapse. So this is not omnidirectional. It can only be done in one direction.
So this is that's a mini demonstration that we made with those like.
That's the same with
Just like let's just.
that we made with these.
Yes. So that just. But we,
Right.
of course, we like it less because it's flat, so it doesn't kind of give you this the structural embodiment.
Right.
But this would be the situation.
Well, that's a subset of this.
Yes.
But it's not a structure because it's not independently enclosing space. All right.
And then we have this, right? So you see, then we have this, which is exactly the point of the
Right.
system under tension. under the loads here, tensionally it goes on, but if we flip it and try to put them into the compression loads, then they just go into the slack. Okay, great.
Okay. Now, if we took a solid icosahedron like this and applied forces on it like we did on this, what you end up is that as the embodiment of that. These represent the same types of forces as we demonstrated in this, with these being the tension elements and these being the compression elements.
So in speaking engineering ones, that's what they call tension members and compression members, right? So the term members is introduced there to kind of allow for this split. So then it gives you additional vocabulary to say, well, these elements, these embodiments in this particular layout, they would be tension members, but if we shift it, then the same embodiments, they would be the compression members.
Right. But you have to see the difference here is that the tension elements stay on the outside shell of the icosahedron, but the compression members cross within the structure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
And why is this? Why is that so important?
because at this point, this structure now becomes omnidirectional. And you can turn it around, and the tension components remain under tension, and the compression components within the structure remain under compression.
So in other words, if we were to flip it and make it the other way around, so the tension inside and the compression outside, so that wouldn't work.
It doesn't work.
So that the principle here is to have the tensional interface.
And this is just a diagram of the forces that happen automatically when you compress an icosahedron.
Mm.
You don't have to plan it, you don't have to design it. That's what happens. Just as you don't plan to do anything here, these forces come as a manifestation of the structure.
Okay, so effectively, what we are saying here, if we really put it in a very, sort of cool down and simple form. So the fact is that what we're dealing with, we're having a space, right?
Right.
So, and within that space, you have the certain structures as the integrations of the elements, which can make a certain fill up of the space, right?
Right.
So, and we can do the close packing in that way. The close packing of some arbitrary space, it could be based on the tetrahedrons, sort of triangulated. It could be based on cubes, and it could be made based on, for example, on the icosahedrons, right?
Correct.
So, and the logic here is that we have to ask the first question, right? The first question is, why the cubes? So, in first scenario, so the fact is that we have a tendency to live in the man-made world, which is based on everything cubic. And the cubes, they stack well on top of each other. And the thing is that, truth to be told, the numerical processing of the cubes is the easiest of these three. So the math, the calculations, they would be the easiest to perform with the cube-based thing, and that's a significant convenience for the whole tradition of engineering, because we should also remember that even 100 years ago, the engineers, they worked with a pen and paper, right? And whatever helped them to save on calculations and make them simple, that really had a huge impact on what would be in and what would be out. But that establishes the traditions, it establishes the habits, and establishes the way how we treat the elementary objects and so on. So, in that respect, the cube is not an elementary thing. So, in that respect, the cube could always be then that would be the tetrahedron would be the elementary subset.
Right.
So, meaning that every cube would be composed or would be deconstructible to the integration of the tetrahedrons.
Right.
So, and that's the principle of the triangulation. But then the question might arise, like, okay guys, if this is your tetrahedron, okay, you are replacing the cube and apparently making life more difficult by requiring greater calculations there, right? But why would you actually need the transition from the tetrahedron, which is, say, simpler than the cube, to the icosahedron? And here we come to this important thing, so that if the original stem, right, it's like a stem of the plant. So you see, like, if this is the original thing, it has two pathways. One, if you kind of add the two up and start just adding them up as the addition of the tetrahedrons, you're going to go into the cubes. But in fact, what is an icosahedron? It's a, putting it in a simple way, it would be fancy multiplication of the tetrahedrons, creating the elementary unit which satisfies a number of the criteria that is really going to be helpful to deal, with the next set of the structural properties. So that's really, in fact, a very simple thing. So it's effectively, it's a fill up of the space which is based on this elementary geometry.
Yeah. When you get here, the structure itself, the icosahedron, has the largest volume for surface area, meaning, so that means you need the least amount of material to build the structure.
And that is what...
And that is another energy reserve.
That's it. So
principle.
this is, so once again, we're getting back to this, right? So we're getting back to this. Here is the stem. Let's say I would get some improvised, cube here, right? So this is the origin. This is a boxy thing. So out of this origin, we travel into the boxy things, and then they fill up the space. The boxes,
Yes.
they fill up the
That's
space.
okay.
That's not the question. The tetrahedrons, the triangulation fills up the space. The icosahedrons, they fill up the space. All of them, they are able to fill up the space. But then, on the other hand, when we are looking at the thing that there is within it, fill up the space, you get the volume and you get the surfaces. And now the critical thing comes in. So what are we going to do? Are we going to do the addition of the tetrahedrons and move into the boxes? Or we're going to do the multiplication? And that's where the principle of the close packing sits in together in the duality, surface plus volume. So this is the winner by the best ratio between the surface and the volume. So that's a really, in essence, that's a very simple thing. And yes, of course, this boxy thing has very well established mathematical toolbox, which has been done and which is good for the man-made things. Now, truth to be told, when we move to this as the elementary thing, the mathematical toolbox is not developed. Nobody has been ever bothered in the man-made things to make any kind of mathematical toolbox based on those things. So, but that's really the critical point. So when we talk about biology, we live by the first principle. Surface, because life happens in membranes, right? So you see that's where the elementary exchanges are, and the volume. So this is really the simple, that's the epicenter. We're saying nature doesn't bother with our mathematical numerical tools.
Right.
It kind of processes things algorithmically, and that's the centerpiece of the whole, that's the centerpiece of the whole understanding. Am I correct in interpreting it that way? So that we really get it right and say, why do you guys bother with those uncomfortable icosahedrons instead of taking nice cube, which everybody has been already processing and have all the tools and all the numbers and so on. And this is really what it is, right? So that we take the discomfort of getting into the icosahedrons because it gives it adheres better to the principle of minimal energy and the best close packing, surface to volume.
Exactly.
So that's really, in fact, I would say that this is the essence of the biotensegrity.
Omnidirectional stability.
Exactly. So this is the principle, that's the central principle of biotensegrity. It's not wires, it's not struts, it's not even icosahedron per se as a geometric shape.
No, it
It's-
has to do with the energy forces that create it.
And that it's basically it derives from the elementary structure which gives us the surface volume relationship, because there is no surface without the volume and no
Right.
volume without the surface, so they coexist, right? And and on the practical side, there's I always quote this wonderful thing from Jaap van der Waal: life happens at membranes.
Right.
So that's why we can't,
Right.
for biology we have to respect the surfaces and we have to respect the volume as the close picking.
Right.
So most life means most surfaces per volume, and that brings us into this thing which actually, humanly we are kind of uncomfortable. They say, guys, let's say we have to tear our hair and be, it's an elegant but uncomfortable piece. But nonetheless, we take it and we build on this, because otherwise we fall in contradiction with this first principle.
And these structures are only permutations and combinations of this structure. So you can build it as a tower, you can build it in a round, you can build it as a helix. And it's always going to seek this least energy, largest volume for surface area, omnidirectional capability building into the system.
So, in other words, if this is the element when where we talk about highlighting this omnidirectionality, but once we move into the real world, right? So you see, we have the G-force, we have the difference, it's a directional world, right? So therefore, to maximize the embodiments and the combinations in the real world, which has directions, so then they're going to be the fancy, so this is like a fancy multiplication of those.
Right.
So, and that's really the principle that we really have to kind of take on board, so that keeping the principle in hand as opposed to just being, does this strut resemble a bone, or does this thing resemble a muscle?
Right. And so it was always understanding that it has to follow these rules of nature. That you go, so that when I stop worrying about what it looks like as much as how does it function.
But you see, in that respect, it's a great thing that you were, that your first primary training was kind of, was still direct connection, direct experiential connection to the human body, right? So you see, you were not looking for the numerical numerical resolution, but you were making, you were looking, does it fit, does it feel right, does it connect, does it kind of respond as a whole? So that's really wrestling. We're back to
wrestling.
We're
back to the army concept of you never stand where you can sit, you never sit where you can lie down, you never stay awake where you can be asleep. You're always seeking the least amount of energy to do a particular task you need to do.
That's that's nicely put. Okay, so this is really great. So, and now the question what I wanted to ask is that, obviously, so first you started by building the models yourself, and of course at the same time, since Snelson even made a career as an artist out of those elements, and they are beautiful. So, and of course this artistic thing kind of sometimes distracts people from their true nature, and just let's get a little bit more sort of the 1980s. You started bringing them around, you started participating in conferences, and we're going to go through this sort of stack of books and so on, which are indicating your participations and so on. What are the moves and what are the ideas, and how much they were, how much they were influenced by the, by the exploration of the models, by the new, let's say, communications with people and so on. So what besides of the systems approach, what were the other highlights of the 80s?
Well,
I'm challenging your memory in that sense that
Yeah,
things
it's
kind of
hard.
blended, but let's try to do it.
yeah, actually, most of it is really, I ended up being out there on my own, pretty much. I had the group of manual physicians doing manual medicine, which was an organization I belonged to. They would have me speak fairly regularly. So there was this one small group of maybe 300 members.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I had very little support.
So, okay, how did it feel, and what were the processes that you went through? Was it disappointment? Was it the quest, was it sort of kind of resentment? Was it the quest for, okay, I have to find the new ways and find.
Yeah, it was always, first of all, I was still in clinical practice, and that was really the majority of my time. This was a side thing that I was doing, and it was essentially a challenge and fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was involved in this, and I mean, I would get to speak at a lot of places, and I would invite myself in various ways. But you submit a paper, and they accept it, and you go talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I went around the country and around the world, inviting myself to meetings. So I went to Spain, and I went to Switzerland, and I went to Paris, and I went to England. So that was the benefit I was getting more than really wide acceptance of the concept.
Okay, that's a very healthy perspective, I would say, that when you would look at it and say, I get myself invited there, I have a good reason to visit these places, and, I have an interest, but hopefully I get something interesting to say, to some interesting people to meet.
Yeah, so in an audience of 100, maybe 1 or 2 would actually understand, get a clue as to what I was saying,
Mm-hmm.
and out of an audience of 300, maybe 1 would really get interested in do something with it in their own work. And often I didn't know that they were doing it. They would just then take it off and run with it on their own. But most of it really gave me an opportunity to go around and shoot my mouth off and talk about it to different groups, often interesting people. Occasionally they would challenge me, but that was very rare.
That's a good point.
They would say, "Thank you very much, Dr. Levin," and the next speaker is.
His next speaker is going to speak about the biomechanics of the liver. And
Exactly. So it was, that was very. The thing that it got accepted in a lot of these meetings means there was always somebody on the scientific committee who said, "There's something where we ought to listen to in this."
Mhm.
So I always knew there was somebody who was paying some sort of attention.
Okay.
But at the same time, for the most part, if somebody was doing knee stuff, they just stuck in doing their knee stuff, but they didn't think about this at all. It was an abstract concept for them. They always fell back on their other things.
Mm.
So it was really mostly what I did as a hobby more than anything else. But I was a little pushy at times with it, and as I said, I get around get around Europe, United States.
Mm-hmm.
It was good. And it really wasn't until I retired in, let's see, but that's about 17 years ago that I retired.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until then that I really spent a lot of time on this, more time on this,
Mm-hmm.
and did a little bit more writing, and by that time I started interfacing with a few people who really sucked it up and started working with it. I also found people who were better model builders than I was, and I said, well, then I don't need to build the models anymore. So in the 90s, I hooked in with Tom Flemons, who was an artist who lived down in an island, Salt Spring Island in Vancouver area, and he delighted in building these models,
So he was the gentleman who invented the Tensegrity toy, right?
Right.
And that's what he made his living of.
That's right. It's called the Squish. It's very it's a worldwide toy that little kids love.
Yeah, it's being sold until today, and
It's still being sold today.
in even the Toys R Us and so on.
Yeah, it's widespread design and toy. And
Oh, here we are.
Understand that as I talked about before, it's not what turned me on because I never saw it as
Okay.
specific structures.
Hmm. But I think that we will get back to this a bit in a bit larger, in a bit greater detail, because this is an important thing. Because when you talk about the 90s, for you the 90s were already quite advanced step, in the whole evolution, like 20 years in.
Oh,
but
yeah.
for people today, 90s is like almost 30 years back. So, and that's why we have to take this into account, and that's true. So for most of the people who have experienced Biotensegrity now, from their perspective, it's probably like majority, for a lot of them, I think that it's those biological resemblance models that actually caught their eyes, right?
Yes.
And at the same time, what we meet as the, let's say, resistance within the certain number of practitioners and the scientists and so on, is that basically the opposite reaction, that, hey guys, you are kind of coming around with this resemblance toys, and they are no longer nowhere near the true complexity of the spine.
Right.
So I think that that's really the part that I really wanted to bring through the beginning of this series in particular, so that we can see the genesis of the whole evolution. And you see, not a single time we haven't yet used this resemblance items. We haven't even, only like by now we kind of got to a bit more of the illustrations, but we were really returning to the same thing. Processes, right? Close packing, triangulation, the most effective relationship between the membranes and the volumes, and respectively the minimal energy principle. So that's the quest in that respect, right? And on the practical side, it was linked to the tensional reasoning and the tensional thinking that you got all the way back from where it is, right? So you see that's Grant's anatomy.
Right.
So the things that you were getting there as a practical, as a medical student, and then as the orthopedic surgeon.
Right.
So I think we can see here that's a combination of factors that are really, from the most general processes to the most practical ones. And, I would say they just happen to be there, right? In a way that this embodiment just happened to click and be there in the right moment of time. So the model that gave the embodiment, because we are the humans, the embodiment gives us the additional, gives something to our mind's eye, gives us the thing to play with, to discover the new relationships and so on, and then return back to processes, right? So I think that that's a fantastic journey, and I hope that we achieved quite a bit of the additional clarification throughout it. And of course we are not done. This is just kind of the first round of going through, and then we will have to build the other links, right? So you see, because of course the thing is, we are all realistic people, and as much as and beautiful it is as the basic science, the fact is that we are at the intersection with the practicalities, right? And the people who are mainly our viewers and listeners, they would be representing the whole spectrum of the biomedical scope. So that's why we really have to take on board and connect it, not only with the Grant's anatomy, but also with the bigger picture, because you are the living witness of 70 years of modern medicine, right? And how it all links with that, and along the line you met tons of people, and we're gonna get back to all of your things on the walls and all of your, all of your whatever diplomas and all this, whatever are the certificates and whatever else. right? So that we really connect this picture to the bigger evolution of the whole medical field and the science in general. So, and I think it's going to be really continue to be a fascinating journey.
All right, welcome back, everyone. If you want to put on your camera, go right ahead. We're going into question and discussion mode, and while we're getting Leonid and Graham set up, Leonid, I don't know if you saw in the chat,
Yeah, I've seen.
Tatiana and Svetlana are here from together from Moscow. So I think they're doing bunk bed Zoom the way you and Graham are today. Tatiana, if you want to take off your put on your camera and your mic and say hello, please do. But they put some really wonderful stuff in the chat, and they are in touch with Olga as well. So and they're thanking you, Graham, and they're thanking Steve, and they're thanking Leonid. So I just wanted to say welcome to them especially.
Okay, yeah, I read it further, yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
It's our Biotensegrity.
She's showing us the models. Wonderful.
Oh, yeah, the models for the
Wait,
models.
I'm going to spotlight you. Yes.
Oh, wow. This is some serious sizes, huh?
Yeah.
Wow. How wonderful.
Oh. Susan, you get artistically excited, huh? So you know,
Yeah. Well,
so
you know,
you-
I was Olga and I had a little Zoom meeting yesterday for about an hour and a half, and we were talking about college.
what is a big Zoom meeting?
Well, we got to be on Zoom together yesterday for about an hour and a half. So
Yes,
it's lovely to have all this energy, positive energy coming from Moscow. We appreciate it. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. And can we also say
I'm
that
I'm glad to see you. This company, its company. Sorry.
no, thank you very much. We're so happy to have you here. Also, Chris, you want to just talk about what's going to be happening with this series and embodied biotensegrity coming up? Because I think it's, for anybody who's been following this, before we just jump into the discussion, it's so important.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so our membership program, Biotensegrity Trailblazers, next week on Wednesday at Biotensegrity Book Club, we are all going to pre-watch or re-watch episodes number 1 and 2 of the Everything I Know series. And then when we meet for our regular monthly discussion, or one of our regular monthly discussions, we're going to be talking about it. So I'm always excited. It's a good reason to go back and revisit it, but also it's a smaller, more intimate group, and our discussions are always fantastic. So thanks, Susan.
Yeah, and Chris will put the link in the chat to embodiedbiotensegrity.ca so that you can connect with that group if you're interested in doing that. All right, over to you, Leonid and Graham.
No, but so first you should have got a little praise to the, or whatever, pay a little homage to the gods of the YouTube and other algorithms, right? So you see, and in your convincing voice, ask people to not to forget to please those by the likes and the comments.
Yes, please like the videos if you're on YouTube. please, we love it when you add comments. We love it
But
when
actually, it's
subscribe.
beyond. I think it's beyond our love, right? It's just the reality of the way that those algorithms work, right? And because if this is to be shown by YouTube to the like-minded people and bring them in and kind of spread the message and kind of get things in a different way from the 80s, unfortunately, that's what they want, right? So you see, they want, they want you to do what the school. I don't know, like what the new generation does, puts links and gets into the lengthy typed conversations, right? So, and put likes, sorry. So, and our audiences are not very good in that. So, oh, wow, it was a great video. How many likes did you leave? Like likes, what the hell is this? But that's the way that those algorithms are designed, unfortunately. Okay, so let's move on. Actually, I must say that look, I think it's a good thing that you guys starting from the beginning, because I think that episode was designed kind of, especially the number 10 was designed to sort of to wrap things around, and actually, and it's true. It's so important for us to kind of redevelop or re-emerge the whole thing, get back to the beginning. Because otherwise you get some bits and pieces which get catch the imagination and which you pique attention from the opponents, and then we kind of get this engage in the conversation about it. But the first part is really that essential, is that even Steve's paper from 1981 doesn't mention the word integrity, doesn't mention anything. It purely goes into the principles. And what I kind of, because it's been 3 years, right? What I kind of liked about this episode is that is really highlighting the fact is that, look, life would have been so much easier for all of us if we were in the cubic domain. It's really, because, sometimes when you speak to, not sometimes, but most of the times when you speak from the people, for the audiences from the outside, whether it's the clinical audiences who get scared of anything mathematical, right? Or whether it's the engineering audiences who are kind of suspicious, like, why do you do this fancy thing, right? You do this fancy thing because you want to be special, yes? You want to draw attention. You didn't like our cubes. You are a bunch of ignorant people who don't know how it works. You're too lazy to study calculus and so on, and you want to be special, right? That's the attitude. But this is uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in. It's a very uncomfortable way to go into from the triangulations, let's say, and into the icosahedrons and so on. It's a very uncomfortable position because, from the audiences for who it's really important, you demand them to make a step that they would trust their kind of mathematical intuition, and you invite them on a journey of kind of significant extra learning, right? And for the people who have kind of a mathematical say and the mathematical background, you are actually inviting them into something uncomfortable, which they don't like. So
okay, can I say two things? One is, anybody who wants to make a comment, if you know how to do the raise hands thing, then that helps us keep the order of who goes next for their questions or comments. And the other thing is, I just want to have you clarify, guys, if you would. You were talking in the interview about how between the boxes and the tetrahedrons and the icosahedrons, you were saying all of them close pack. But icosahedrons don't perfectly close pack, which is what I think is part of what allows that wiggle room, is what allows for the emergence perhaps of life, because it's not hard.
Susan, I would say that this is okay. That becomes, now we're moving into the technical side, right? And what is
okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and what is close packing per se? So are we, when we say close packing, do we actually mean in which sense do we mean are we still getting back to the because you see we were just discussing this with Graham, right? And I actually, even for myself, when you rewatch those things over and over, you kind of catch this point and this discussion about the tetrahedron and the fact that when it flips, even though tetrahedron is such an elementary thing, right? So you see, geometrically speaking, the surface to volume relationship, but when it becomes part of the interactions, right? So you see, it's biased, it's oriented, and that means that it cannot give you a sustainable cycle. So in that sense,
Yes.
the fact that, the transition from the tetrahedron to the next level to kind of omnidirectionality, it becomes more than just a fancy word on omnidirectionality, and that's actually becomes more because we have to ask the next thing. What would be the embodiment which is compatible with the cyclical processes?
Yes.
So, where the processes can do the phase changes and where they can do some sort of cyclical shifts from one phase into another, and that would be kind of a true, let's say, separation of the internal space from the external space, because it gives you the clock. So it's a really interesting thing, right? Because in that sense, the tetrahedron cannot be a clock.
But I think it also gives you the fractality, the multi-scale levels.
Yeah. That's the next conversation, which is important, which we go into, because if you have the interactions, where does it flow through, right? So you see, you have to get into the flow through, you have to get into the multi-scale thing, which starts taking us away from the structures and so on. But I just wanted to get this first level, right? Is that this transition into, at least that was my own reaction, which I didn't kind of pick up back then. It was my own kind of aha moment. We were just discussing it with Graham, my own aha moment from rewatching this episode, right? Is that it's not just trivial, like getting one tetrahedron into another, and it's not trivial getting the transition to the omnidirectionality. It's not just fancy, it's critical in order to enable the process which has the built-in cyclicality, and in that sense the process with its own internal clock. And that means that this is the process which could be separated from the outside, let's say space, the space-time kind of entity.
Yeah.
Steve, so I think that is really well. I mean, it was my personal kind of reaction.
Steve, did you want to chime in on this? I didn't. Steve, you were muted. Can you unmute? Steve has his hat from Guatemala. He got back from Guatemala at 2 a.m.
I think Colombia.
Today. Wait, Steve, you're still muted.
There it is. I got it.
There you go.
Blocked there. It's Colombia, not Guatemala that I'm back from.
I'm sorry. You were in Cartagena. I'm sorry.
Right. But yeah, no, I enjoyed listening to all this because, it was a much simpler life for me to just do these things. I wasn't complicated. It wasn't a complicated thing. It just sort of evolved. And most of the time I was thinking about foams, because foams are alive. They don't just stay bubble to bubble to bubble. The reason they keep changing shape is some of the reason you were talking about, Susan, is that these shapes are sort of don't quite fit and they keep changing. So there's been innumerable articles on how many sides do a bubble in a foam have. And, so they keep seeing averages and things like that, but they all follow the same principle of so many edges meet at so many forces at so many times. And they're always trying to make this thing work. So they keep changing shape. And that's what happens in this, so that the icosahedron is not perfect, but what it's trying to do is become sort of perfect. So you're trying to get the largest volume for surface area, which is the icosahedron, yet at the same time the strongest structure, which shrinks down to the tetrahedron. So it's constantly moving back and forth in this cycle of which is stronger, which is larger, and have more volume. So it's constantly doing this oscillation, and this oscillation is what creates the life, is what I see happening. So it's the life that the bubbles create within themselves, trying to equalize these forces and get it, back and forth into one stable structure, which they never can do.
Yeah, but that's it. So you see that's what you can see as the coherent continuity of the cycles, right? So because yesterday as I was driving to Graham, I was listening to an interview of Stephen Wolfram where he was talking about on his physics project and on like the computational interpretation of the second law of the thermodynamics, and he really got this very interesting. It's a very interesting conversation, right? But where he kind of brings it as a conversation about the fact that we are computationally bound observers in the computationally unbound universe, right? And in that sense, it's actually the presence of being bound, right? So you see it's the very fact of being bound and being able to be bound that creates a coherent experience that gives us the self and gives us effectively what would be the life units, right? So I think that is really kind of bringing us into this novelties that, like if a living organism is a clock that can sort of get it in a self-sustained thing, and it's a really interesting set of conversations, I think, deep implications which are coming from this recent conversation. But anyway, I'll step back. I just got too excited.
Okay, well let me, Bob, hold on just a second. So something I've been thinking about with all of this recently is, because it relates to this idea of, are we an open system or a closed system? And we're of course open systems and we are far from equilibrium systems, energetically, but then we are also closed enough. So I have this thought in my head recently about being open enough and closed enough. So it's not
remember
Natalie, or wait. So it's not a strict either or, but it's enough that I remain separate from others, that my heart remains separate from my lungs at whatever scale level you want. It's open enough and closed enough. Sorry, go ahead, Leah.
Yeah, but you see, but Reznikov, Natalie, from Montreal, right? So you see, she is the one who studies those things under the, there's even a label which is called the Kloppen system, right?
Say that word again.
Kloppen.
Like closed and open?
For closed and open for open. So it's a Kloppen system.
I didn't know. That's wonderful.
So I mean, that's what that's one of the terms that she actually used in one of the conversations. I mean, so it's
Natalie Reznikov you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's exactly the point, because otherwise it's this old style distinction between is it open or is it closed, right? So you see that there has to be a much more specific thing, is that where it's either Kloppen or open CL, whatever. So you see that whether it's almost closed or whether it's almost open, and it's that, and it in a sense that it kind of brings us back to the same thing. It's not pure compression, not pure tension, right? So it's always open close, right? So you see there is a mix between the two.
So Kloppen is better than Ozed.
Yeah, the word is Kloppen, yes.
Yeah, that's great. All right, Bob, over to you.
I hope this fits into the current conversation, but after our last meeting, I was thinking about a lot of the concepts that we discussed from Steve and Leonid, you as well, and Steve Scharferman, about the elastic suit and the swarm intelligence and about the interdigitation. So what I was thinking about is, embryologically, as everything develops, we look at things as parts and how they come together. We look at the structures, but it somewhat occurred to me, maybe we should be spending more time looking at the connections. I mean, how does everything integrate? Because it's like we just look at the part, but how do they connect everybody else? And I think that it was kind of a, I don't know, light bulb moment for me, but I think that maybe that fits into the current conversation, we're having, and how do we get, open and closed and fitting into space and surface and volume relationship itself. But that's one insight, I guess, I had that people can either, comment on. I'd appreciate my further understanding. So thank you.
Because of course, putting parts together is the cadaveric perspective, right? Whereas starting embryologically and being part of an embryological and a developmental continuum and a evolutionary continuum, that's a whole different ballgame that doesn't involve parts. Sorry, Leonid, go ahead.
No, I was just, but I think that actually, indeed, that was in there. That was in the episode 9, right? So you see that conversation that, yes, that's something which is really underappreciated. So that that every moment itself of for the developing system, like in that sense, it's even the word developing system means that it develops towards something, right? So it's a living system from kind of the first moment of conception, and it's in that respect has its own identity, right? So you see, that's what we really want to highlight, that it's not developing towards something, it's actually living. So, and that it's that every phase has to have its own kind of, it's not a transition or preparation or incomplete kind of step towards some end result, right? So that this is actually, it's a strong definition of process, not the weak definition of process. So, yes, you have some more raised hands, right?
No, nobody else has their hand raised.
Okay, just because they're all muted, so we just need to give a little bit of
guys. I know
time.
you've got something to say. All right, Craig. Craig, listen, when you speak, Craig, don't get too close to your microphone. I think that distorts your voice.
I'll sit back. Is that okay?
Oh, wow. Try that again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think speak very slowly so that it will minimize the distortion.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
Here's my.
I have to say that Craig was one of the first and almost only biomechanics person who ever listened to me at all the biomechanics meetings I ever spoke at. This was in 2002 in Switzerland. Biomechanics meeting.
Can you see my screen?
Craig, we cannot see your screen.
Okay, so
try again.
It won't allow me to share the screen. Must be a firewall or something.
Wait, it won't allow you?
No, it says block or allow, and allows grayed out. So.
Okay, Craig, I'm going to make you a co-host and see if that changes things. Okay. Also, for those of you who don't know Craig, he was at the very first big in Europe. Was that 2009? And he's coming to us from South Africa. Try again, Craig.
Yeah, it's somewhat different.
Not working. Okay.
So now this is to do with pentagons. When a pentagon has 120.
All you have to do is click on share screen on the arrow, and then you can allow him to share a screen. You click on the little share screen.
Yeah, Now, thanks, George. I think what's happening is he's getting something blocking it from his end. Is that
Oh,
right,
okay. Sorry.
Craig?
Zoom is not working. It's not working through.
Yeah.
It took about 10 minutes to try log on, and it's something not working. So
Okay.
it's a pentagon. Has, if you look at the cubic's symmetry, has 90-degree angles. And 90 degrees is mechanically the most unstable condition you can have. So when you make machines in 3D, the mathematical frame is 100% unstable. And so that's why the body doesn't use a cubic system. And that's why machines can't make human parts and can't copy the body in robots. But we actually function in the pentagon system, which is a 108 degree 5 component instead of a 90 degree 3 component. But unfortunately, I can't share my screen to show the pictures. So I'll have to put it in a PDF and share it with you at some other time.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Diane, I think you're up next.
Thank you. I have two things I wanted to ask about. Oh, I wanted to comment on Leonard's comment about developing. When we look at what happens in the body and we go from embryos to standing on 2 feet, we are not developing into something, but we are developing through a process. And that process gets us onto 2 feet. We can't fulfill our organism unless we go through that process. Yeah. Okay. So the word in movement work, we use the term developing because we're always looking at the patterns in the body that we add, that grow and add and develop into a two-footed person. That was my first comment. My second was, when we look at this, we speak of this as an endo-icasa, right? Endo-icosahedron with the versus the exo-icosahedron. The exo-icosahedron is an outside shape. Okay, in Laban work we learn about the icosahedron and we study movement within it, which teaches us about our whole shape, our whole use of shape in the world. Okay. But the endo-icasa is not like that. It has these diamond shapes here on those four sides. And so, and this is a little confusing. So help us understand about those diamond shapes and why this is not it's a kind of icosahedron, but it's not.
What Daniel Claude Martin calls a quasi-icosahedron.
All right.
So who wants to jump on this one? Steve, did you want to? Steve, I think you're muted.
There you are. What you're seeing is a collapsed icosahedron, slightly collapsed icosahedron. And as I said, this thing is always pulsating. It expands and collapses, so it expands out to icosahedron, which has all its faces triangulated, which are stable shapes. But when you apply force to it, is sort of collapsing down, and this is collapsing down. Eventually, it goes to the octahedron, and eventually to the tetrahedron, and then it becomes nothing because you can't get less than a tetrahedron. And I don't have the model handy, but I have a model that actually does that, and you see it collapse out and expands and collapse down in these levels. The tensegrity icosahedron, which is this, what this is in a perfectly shaped icosahedron. It's already started collapsing down. So you're seeing that transitional position.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find a model for it.
But you see, it was a really good part that Steve mentioned just before, right? In his previous, in his previous inclusion, right? So you see, and actually what Susan mentioned about the imperfections, right? So that, in fact, that you have this continuous kind of competition between external and internal, and between what he called the strongest, more compressed form, and which is under the external influence, right? And its maximum volumization, if you wish, which would be kind of when it gains, when it actually reclaims that space. So that this kind of two states, the maximum volume and the state of the maximum strength. Yeah, what happened? Okay.
I'm just spotlighting you guys while you're talking. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so these are these two states, right? So these two states are really essential, and it's kind of going through the state. And in fact, if we take it a bit further, so actually, in the light of where we are moving now overall, as the kind of the big tendencies in the scientific world, right, is that would be that particular error function. So that actually what is creative, it's the optimization of error. That's the essence of all creativity, all the creative processes. So you see, errors, they feed processes. So perfect processes, they don't have time. They are kind of timeless. They stay still. So in that sense, this imperfection takes much further kind of connotations. So that you can't have time, you cannot have processes, you cannot have multiple states without the imperfection. And on the other hand, since we are really looking at it not as the particular single state, but as the processes, so then yes, nothing prevents you from the situation that under kind of stacking and the succession of the external loads, the system is going to go into the further and further and further kind of crystallization, which is going to bring it closer to the to the true kind of tetrahedral space. And on the other hand, when it comes into the scenarios of the lack of the external resistance, then the system is going to be claiming more and more and more of the internal volume within the given surfaces. So, and that kind of brings us back to, say, Van der Waal and his polarities and the conversation about the sphericity of the egg cell versus the kind of the crystallization of the sperm cell, right? So, and all these other types of the relationships that could be seen there. And you shouldn't be particularly worried that, for example, the sperm cell doesn't represent a perfect tetrahedron, right? Conceptually, within that particular number of the elements, it is the embodiment of the least internal volume for the given surface, provided that you still have the essential elements there, such as the cytoplasm, the nucleus, and so on and so on. So we kind of get back to the same, like we had this conversation about close open. It's not close versus open, it's always an oscillation, right? So you see that both are present. So 99.9% open, but still has some closure. 99% open, but still 99% closed, but still has some opening. So without it, it would be the timeless, those processes would be really timeless. So, and they wouldn't be, without time, they wouldn't be processes. So I think that that's really a bigger implication of this, of the whole thing. So that imperfection is what, and the optimization of the imperfection, that what drives the creative processes, and that what drives the clocks. I don't know if it's helpful, but that's kind of how it goes.
Exactly. And I think it all links to sort of what we learned from the Penrose tiling and such as well, but that's for another day. A deep well for another day, perhaps.
So shall you bring us back to?
I think we have, Diane, did that answer?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, at least it's helpful, so that's already good. So.
Leon, any thoughts about the idea of the word developing?
Of the word developing.
Can you say more, Diane? Can you say more about that? About your question?
Yeah. What I was saying about developing is that we as an organism are always changing, and one of those things that we change is how the process we go through to get ourselves up onto 2 feet. We call that development, but do you call it something else?
Well, that's a good question, but you see, that sort of brings us back to this, these conversations that we always had. On the one hand, we cannot just start from nowhere, and that means that we have to rest upon the legacy concepts, and the legacy concepts always have some distortions to them, right? So, and then it comes to the point, okay, so what do we do? Do we repurpose a term from somewhere else where it's not so polluted? Do we try to resurrect the term and kind of give it a bit of gradually give it the improved meaning, because it sort of looks still, savable or salvageable? Or whether we have a term which is so bad that, the only way to do it is to discard it, right? So I think that the word developing, development, and so on is, I think it's has this potential for different, for still playing with it, right? Because it's a develop, and then you can get also the envelopes and outvelopes and so on. You can kind of play with the roots and give the extended meaning into it. Plus, of course, the fact is that, when we are discussing, I'm just trying to get this clear, right? Is that this is really, really important to keep this in mind, right? So what has been defining, what has been this defining kind of thing over the last, say, year and a half, right? It's been this AI thing. So AI, machine learning, and so on. So, but what is essential there? That means that it's the study, it's the inquiry into the world, which is based on the error function, on the internal error function optimization, not on the value and the outcome function. So historically, engineering is about outcome function. So you want to do something, and you start, and in time and in process, your process is a subset of getting the outcome. If you don't get the outcome, you failed. The transitional phases, they call transitional phases because they are there on the way to the outcome. No outcome, no nothing. So that's value. Now, the thing is that are value functions present in our life? Yes, they are. You need to eat and drink, let's say, roughly 10 times a day, right? So you see, that would be your external interaction with the world, without which you would be very uncomfortable. You need to breathe 20,000 times a day, which is still infrequent compared to the internal processes. So those are value functions, right? You know, like when we are plugging into Zoom, that's even less frequent and more specific value function. So these are the external outcome functions. But all this is powered by the internal error optimization functions, which go from those millimeter, milliseconds to the micrometer, microseconds to the nanometer, nanoseconds, and so on, which are so huge compared to this outcome value functions that, you know, it's just incomparable. But that's what makes it into this kind of clopen or open and opens that, you know, like whatever you would try to do this word. So it's a giant internal error optimization function that's internal living and multiple kind of lives that your organism has, and the tiny interface with the external world where we are able to take high value resources with a certain kind of frequencies, which are the frequencies of the meter seconds in our world. So, and when we keep in mind and clearly put this duality, right? So you see that value function, of course, there could be errors on the way to the value functions, but the errors, they are facilitating a certain particular outcome. When you're optimizing the internal processes for that flow of the minimal error, you don't know the outcome. So, you know, in that sense, we were just having this conversation with Graham, right? Let's take, you know, for example, a certain 3 months old embryo in utero. So if we look at it from the perspective of the value function, it's a stage. It's not sustainable outside of the womb. It's not sustainable outside of the, you know, the entire system of support and exchange, which is provided by umbilical cord and the environment of the mother. But on the other hand, you know, if we would suddenly get a planet devoid of atmosphere, so you would be equally, we would be equally unsustainable as well. So, but those are external value functions, right? But so in that sense, yes, the value function, external value function of a 3 months embryo, like there's not much there that that could be converted. But internal error optimization processes, which allow that growth, integration, and so on, that's continuous. So, and that's why when we use the word development, speaking of your, you know, let's say what the first question you were trying to ask. Yes, developing obviously carries a certain end product. You're developing towards something, right? But what are we going to use for the enveloping function, right? So you see that, you know, enveloping organism, if you wish. So you see, we can, you know, play with these words, right? So you see, and see what we can do, right? For example, the famous things with, you know, Blechschmidt, and there was, you see, for some reason, there was, in English, there were expansion, but there is no official word impansion. So, but if you have those prefixes, you say, okay, if you want to really understand the process, so for the expansion, you need to have the impansion. When you have the expansion, impansion together, it gives you a much better idea of how they could interact, right? So you see whether it's the same thing, right? Whether it's stiffness and compliance. It could be the reduction of stiffness or the increase of stiffness. It could be the reduction of compliance or the increase of compliance, right? So externally, a reduction of compliance and increase of stiffness, they look the same. But internally, those are two completely different processes. So the same thing, right? So you see the impansion, expansion, if we talk about this process. So that's a kind of play that we need to get. So you see, we have to at least move our language and minimal perceptions to those matrices, right? So you see, okay, so there has to be at least two processes, and they could be going, this way and that way. So one would be the error function, increase of error, decrease of error. The other one would be the value function externally, the error function internally, decrease, increase, the value function externally, decrease, increase. And that is a kind of the minimum that we need to get some decent imagery of what's happening. And then once we have at least this, we can say, okay, for that purpose, the word developing is actually pretty good, it's a pretty good word, So
can we
if
also
you take a finite external process in time, if you want to, let's say, kind of look at from here to here, so, okay, the value function was that, but what were the internal error functions which actually made this possible?
So I think also this relates to why we study soft matter. We have these metamaterials that are coming out now, which have error canceling properties, okay, in the materials.
Exactly.
Even error canceling and error correcting properties, more importantly. So they, depending on what is being studied. And so, one of my personal sort of ways of looking at all this stuff is, if this is something that inert systems can do, then why wouldn't biology, over billions of years of evolution, take advantage of these qualities and properties and behaviors that even inert materials can present with, so that we're taking advantage of that biologically? Mother Nature, says, I could use that.
We have the advantage of the inherent multi-scaling, right?
Yes.
So which is not working very well in those so-called, like in those engineered materials. They don't do their self-supporting multi-scaling.
Right, they can't.
It has to be, you can pre-engineer and pre-buffer them with some of it, but it doesn't, go into the cycle. So
I mean, soft matter materials have that mesoscale level, at least one mesoscale level of self-organization, right? But right, of course, they can't do what biology does.
So it just has more.
Yeah. Steve,
okay, so I know that, Diane, I don't know whether it's helpful or not, but this is kind of, that's always what we have as a challenge, right? So it's like we competing between the, the accuracy of, or like, again, the bigger implications and where the thing leads us to, versus which would be the error function, error optimization function, versus doing the squeeze towards the particular like value application that one wants as a therapist.
It's a deeper understanding of the whole idea, which I appreciate. I didn't expect, but there it is. Thank you.
All right. Well, we're getting on to a 2 hour. Well, we're at an hour and 3/4. So I think we're ready for maybe any last minute questions or comments.
We haven't seen or heard Steve. He didn't tell us anything what Feldenkrais would have told us about this particular scenario, right? So you see, or maybe he's just busy and listening in the background.
No, he's here.
No, he didn't show up, Steve Schafferman, so he's just...
Steve Schafferman.
Yes. So you see, I said Feldenkrais, right? So you see...
Yeah. Okay.
I'm here. I'm just listening in the background. So, hello, everybody.
Hi. So
talk to you next time, maybe. I have nothing specific to add.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this was great. A lot of wonderful points. Any last minute thoughts, Steve? Levin.
Oh, I'm just enjoying this. It's rare that you actually go back and understand your history. And we live your history. And so it's there used to be a television program was This Is Your Life. And this is what's happened to me is all of a sudden I see this thing unfolding is this has been my life. And it's very exciting for me. And thank you.
All right.
Well, it's
Graham
very
and
exciting and interesting for us as well, right? So it just
yeah.
so it's a mutual thing.
Graham and Lena, do you want to do our closing toast?
I think we ran out of the tea, but we still have the cups, you know.
You must have some stout or something.
You know, we're about to have go and have dinner, you know. It's otherwise the places here, the place in this little town is going to close. So you see, we need to move our feet, otherwise we'd stay hungry. So,
all right.
Yeah, okay, and we'll take a stout according to your advice. Yes. So.
And cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, you had some water.
All right, we'll say goodbye to you too.
Bye all.